Chris Christie has emerged as a dominant force on the big issue on the campaign trail, terrorism. Front page of the New York Times reports that the issue has breathed new life into his struggling presidential campaign. This weekend in New Hampshire, Christie spoke personally about confronting terrorism.
For lots of other folks in this race, the results of radical Islam are theoretical. They're not for me. You know, I was named U.S. Attorney for New Jersey on September 10th, 2001. When you ask me, do I believe it's legitimate to call it radical Islam? It is murderous radical Islam. And we need to come to grips with that. I live in and see the world the way it is. And as president, I'll govern a world as it is, not as I wish it were.
And Christie also told the crowd that he feared for his wife's survival on September 11th. She worked 2 blocks from the World Trade Center.
While we were on the phone, the second plane hit the second building. And she said to me, I have to go. They're telling us we have to evacuate to our basement. I'll call you as soon as I can. For the next 5.5 hours, I didn't hear from my wife. I was thinking about not having my best friend. I was thinking about what I was going to tell my children. I was thinking about what kind of single parent I would be. And at 2:35 in the afternoon, the phone rang, and it was my wife.
And we're back with the Hardball Roundtable, April, Sabrina, and Ari. Sabrina, so let me start with you. We talked earlier in the show about Iowa. The story in Iowa right now is that Ted Cruz, powered by evangelical voters, really moving up out there. How about Chris Christie in New Hampshire? He is doing this the sort of traditional New Hampshire way. We saw that town hall footage a few weeks ago on addiction. Now he's in the same setting talking about terrorism. I've always thought he's particularly strong in these sort of off-the-cuff settings, fielding questions from the crowd. Is there space for Christie in New Hampshire to do what Cruz is doing out in Iowa?
Well, Chris Christie is certainly putting all of his eggs in the New Hampshire basket. That's where he spends the most amount of time. And certainly, like you said, he is strongest when he gets personal, when he's able to personalize an issue that's really playing out on the ground. And he did it with heroin. He's doing it now with terrorism. What's interesting is that that story he's telling about 9/11 is actually a story he's been telling throughout the course of his presidential campaign. I heard him tell that same story in New Hampshire 2 months ago. But the thing is that in the wake of these terrorist attacks in Paris, it's really hitting home more for a lot of people. I think there's a lot more potency to the story when he tells it now versus when he was telling it over the summer, when there wasn't a lot of conversation around ISIS in the same way that we're having it at this moment. I also think that by and large, the Republican candidates have more or less the same strategy when it comes to ISIS that the administration is already putting into effect right now. So they need to find ways to differentiate themselves. And for Chris Christie, it happens to be the fact that he has lived through the greatest terrorist attack in this country. And so he is kind of playing into the emotions of the people in this particular moment of the campaign.
And you know, April, New Hampshire's different. It's different than Iowa. Iowa's dominated by evangelical Christians in the primary. New Hampshire's a very secular state, even in the Republican primary. I think only about 1/5 of the voters in New Hampshire, Republicans, are evangelicals. So if there's going to be somebody who moves up on Trump out there, there's that lane, I guess, Christie, Bush, Kasich, Rubio. There's room for one of them to emerge.
Well, like you were saying, you know, New Hampshire is more secular, and I think Chris Christie has a lot of secularism to him. But at the same time, I mean, he is capitalizing, as Sabrina said, on this momentum. You know, he touched a tangible chord right now because of what's happening in Paris and the fact that there is an ISIS threat. And he also, you know, to push it even further, he's been talking about the fact that he was the New Jersey state's attorney at the time he prosecuted terrorists. But we have to also remember, this is the piece, it was Al-Qaeda at that time. Al-Qaeda has been degraded severely. Now we're dealing with ISIS, who this administration says has been degraded by 25%, but you still have that 75% out there. But when you say that you have dealt with the terrorists, that does strike a chord that you're a fighter. But we'll see how much any of the states, the early voting states and the caucuses, will really believe and put the power of the vote behind him.